Welcome back to Mr. John Stories, where life's most powerful lessons come wrapped in unforgettable tales. If you're new here, thank you so much for joining the family. Please hit the subscribe button so we can keep sharing inspiring stories like this with you on YouTube. Zendaya stood in her kitchen, hands trembling around a dish towel she wasn't even aware she was holding. The steady hum of the refrigerator was the only sound filling the silence she suddenly felt trapped in. Across the room, Eddie looked like a man being torn apart by his own words, because what he had just admitted was something their marriage had never prepared her for. "I'm in love with someone else." That was the first blow, sharp, shocking, and impossible to absorb. Zendaya blinked at him, certain she had misheard. But Eddie's eyes, glossy with guilt, didn't flinch. In that moment, she felt the ground shift beneath her, as if 10 years of memories had been pulled out from under her feet. But Eddie wasn't done. He swallowed hard, voice cracking as he whispered the word that would split their entire life into before and after. "I want a divorce." The towel dropped from Zendaya's hands. Her breath caught. Divorce. 10 years of growing together, laughing together, surviving together, and he was ready to walk away for someone he barely knew. But here's where everything shifts, because Zendaya didn't react the way most people would. She didn't scream, she didn't beg, she didn't collapse. She gave him a response so unexpected that it froze Eddie in place. A response that would change the course of both their lives. Before we get there, let me ask you something. Have you ever poured your entire heart into someone, only for them to claim they found someone better? Have you ever trusted someone so deeply that you never imagined they'd be the person to cut you the deepest? Because that's exactly what happened to Zendaya that night. One conversation, one confession, and her world tilted instantly. Your whole life can flip in a single moment, a single sentence, and that's what she learned standing in that kitchen. But here's the part no one saw coming. What if I told you Zendaya didn't fall apart? What if I told you her answer shocked even the man who hurt her? What if I told you that instead of walking away, she made a choice that set off a chain of events neither of them could predict? A choice that would test her courage, her loyalty, her dignity, her strength, and force Eddie to confront the truth about everything he thought he wanted. Darling viewer, before we continue, please like this video, drop a comment to support the channel, and subscribe so YouTube pushes these stories to more amazing people like you. Your engagement truly helps our family grow. Now, to understand how a decade of love shattered in one quiet evening, to understand how Zendaya found the strength to give a response that still leaves people speechless, to understand why Eddie, despite everything, would eventually look back on that night as the turning point of his life, we have to go back to where it all began. Back to Detroit. Back to the summer of 2014. Back to the moment two strangers crossed paths and unknowingly set the stage for a love story filled with joy, heartbreak, forgiveness, and choices no one ever expects to make. The kind of warm evening that made people linger outside a little longer, hoping the night would give them something memorable. Zendaya wasn't expecting anything remarkable that evening. She had gone to a downtown art gallery opening with a few friends from work, a casual outing to unwind after a long week at the nonprofit. She stood near a display of abstract paintings, laughing with her friends as she tried to make sense of a canvas that looked like someone had dropped every primary color from the ceiling. Her curls bounced each time she laughed, and her smile was the kind people noticed without meaning to. She talked with her hands, animated and full of life, the kind of presence that warmed a room without trying. Across the gallery, Eddie noticed her long before she noticed him. He had only come because a coworker dragged him along, insisting he needed culture and fresh air after too many hours hunched over sketches at the automotive design firm. Eddie wasn't much of an art expert, and he knew it. But the moment he saw Zendaya's smile, he forgot every awkward thought in his head. He tried to act casual as he approached, though his palms were a little damp, and his heart felt like it was auditioning for a drumline. Standing beside her, he stared at the same upside-down, right-side-up, who-knows-what abstract painting, and cleared his throat. "I've been staring at this thing for 5 minutes," he said softly, "and I still can't tell if it's upside down, or if I'm just hopeless at this." Zendaya turned, amused. "Well," she replied, eyebrow raised playfully, "if you're hopeless, then so am I, because I've been trying to pretend I understand it." Their laughter blended easily, naturally, the first of many moments that would pull them closer in ways neither expected. From there, the conversation came effortlessly. They talked about Detroit's energy, Motown music, their favorite places to grab food after midnight. Eddie introduced himself, and Zendaya saved his number without hesitation. Something about him felt uncomplicated and genuine, qualities she always appreciated. Their first date happened just a few days later. Eddie picked a small restaurant in Midtown known for good pasta and even better atmosphere. Zendaya arrived looking effortlessly stylish, and Eddie, usually reserved, found himself talking more openly than he ever did with anyone new. She told stories with such passion, and he listened as if every word mattered. Soon their dates became adventures. He took her to baseball games, explaining rules she pretended to understand because she enjoyed the way he lit up when he talked about them. She brought him into her world. Cookouts, Sunday dinners, family gatherings overflowing with laughter and music. One summer afternoon, she dragged him to a block party in her childhood neighborhood. The smell of ribs, grilled corn, and sweet smoke floated through the air. People danced, played cards, teased each other loudly. Eddie felt out of place for exactly 30 seconds, until her Uncle Marlon spotted him. "You playin' bones or just spectatin'?" Uncle Marlon boomed, slapping a domino on the table. Eddie sat down, completely lost, much to everyone's delight. When he fumbled the rules, Uncle Marlon shook his head dramatically. Everyone roared with laughter, including Zendaya, who loved how Eddie didn't take himself too seriously. Moments like that made Eddie fall deeper without realizing it. In return, Eddie introduced Zendaya to his world. Apple orchards, fall festivals, quiet weekend drives up north. Zendaya met his parents during a family outing to a cider mill. His mother warmed to Zendaya quickly, and his father, usually guarded, actually smiled when Zendaya proudly showed off her very crooked jack-o'-lantern. They were different, yes, culturally, socially, in the way they approached the world. But those differences didn't divide them. They brought a balance neither had known before. Detroit became the backdrop of their growing bond. Jazz nights at Baker's Keyboard Lounge, walks through Eastern Market, snowy evenings curled up on the couch with cocoa in hand. Inside jokes that made no sense to anyone else. By the end of 2 years, marriage felt less like a question and more like the natural next step. Their wedding at Belle Isle Park was small, heartfelt, and full of joy. Zendaya walked toward Eddie under a canopy of spring blossoms, her gown simple and elegant, her hair adorned with baby's breath. Eddie could hardly breathe when he saw her, a memory that stayed with him for years. Their ceremony honored both families, jumping the broom and sharing a cup of mead as a nod to Eddie's Irish roots. Laughter, music, and love filled the air. Marriage suited them. They bought a cozy brick bungalow between their families. They celebrated every win with pride. They supported each other through challenges. They became a team, strong, united, steady. For years, life felt warm and familiar. But even the strongest love can fade quietly if left unattended. Though they didn't know it yet, the cracks were already forming beneath the surface. Cracks that would one day break their world open. Their wedding day at Belle Isle Park felt like a promise written across the sky. Spring blossoms hung loosely from the trees, and the Detroit River shimmered in the background as Zendaya walked toward Eddie in a gown that seemed made for her. Her hair, crowned with tiny white flowers, framed her face with a softness Eddie had never seen before. His breath caught as she approached him, every step a reminder of how deeply he loved her. Their ceremony blended their worlds with intention. They jumped the broom to honor her heritage. They shared a cup of mead to honor his father's traditions. Their families stood together for the first time, two groups that had grown to care for each other through shared meals, laughter, and countless moments that erased any sense of difference. Married life began in a small brick bungalow not far from both of their families. It was cozy, imperfect, and completely theirs. Zendaya filled the space with warmth, sunflowers on the table, scented candles, little bursts of color in the decor. Eddie added his sketches to the walls, framed drawings of car concepts he hoped would one day make it to production. Together, they built routines that made the house feel like a home. Mornings often began with Zendaya dancing around the kitchen while Eddie made coffee, pretending not to stare at her even though he always did. Evenings were spent visiting Eastern Market, sharing street food, or listening to music while washing dishes together. They celebrated everything: promotions, small victories, even burned dinners that ended in laughter. Zendaya's career grew steadily. She moved from the nonprofit sector into a communications role at a Detroit arts museum. The work challenged her, and Eddie admired how she poured herself into projects that uplifted creative voices in the city. He attended gallery openings with her, proud to stand beside her as she introduced him to artists and donors with confidence. Eddie's career also gained momentum. His design concepts drew attention, and he became a reliable member of his team. But when he lost a promotion he had been certain was within reach, the disappointment hit him hard. He withdrew for a while, frustrated with himself, and worried about the future. Zendaya reminded him of every strength he had and helped him prepare for the next opportunity. Her faith in him steadied his heart. Life shifted again when Zendaya's father became seriously ill. She spent long nights at the hospital, exhausted but refusing to leave his side. Eddie stepped in quietly, taking over everything at home: cooking, cleaning, laundry, whatever she didn't have the energy for. He brought meals to the hospital and sat with her for hours, offering silent support when words felt too heavy. That season was painful, but it drew them closer. They leaned into each other because they had to, and because it was the only way they knew to move forward. They faced challenges like any couple, but they handled them with a sense of unity that made their bond feel solid. Yet below that stability, a few questions lingered. One in particular: children. Zendaya was open to the idea but unsure of the timing. She wanted to be a mother someday, yet she also wanted to continue building her career. Eddie, still recovering from his work setback and savoring the freedom of their current lifestyle, felt uncertain. Their conversations were tender, never arguments, but they ended without resolution. Neither pushed the other, but the silence around the topic began to feel heavier with time. The years passed quickly, and routines settled in so quietly they didn't notice how the spark dimmed. Intimacy became less frequent. Not absent, just different. Softer, predictable, lacking the thrill of earlier days. Zendaya sometimes wondered if this was just what marriage became after a while, a quiet comfort replacing passion. Eddie wondered too, though he didn't say it aloud. They still loved each other deeply. They still supported each other. They still laughed together. But there were fewer moments of surprise, fewer spontaneous nights out, fewer long conversations over wine that stretched into the early hours. Work consumed both of them, and exhaustion became their constant companion. Their 10th anniversary approached, and Zendaya planned a weekend trip to Mackinac Island, hoping to rekindle something between them. She imagined bike rides near the water, sunsets, the simplicity of being together without distractions. But Eddie canceled at the last minute, citing a client meeting he said he couldn't skip. He encouraged her to go with Monica, telling her she deserved a break. She smiled, pretending it didn't sting. Little moments like that began to stack on top of each other. Moments she tried not to overthink. Moments he brushed aside without realizing the weight they carried. Their love was still present, but quieter, thinner, stretched across routines that no longer felt intentional. Neither of them knew it yet, but the slow drift had already begun. Their marriage entered its 10th year quietly, so quietly that neither noticed how far they had drifted until the distance between them began to feel normal. Zendaya was deep into her role at the museum, juggling community projects, exhibitions, and late-night brainstorming sessions. Eddie, newly tasked with leading a major automotive redesign, often stayed late at the office, losing track of time while trying to prove himself after years of setbacks. They were living parallel lives, not unhappy, but not deeply connected either. At first, Zendaya chalked up the changes to stress. She reminded herself that relationships went through seasons, and this was simply a demanding one. Eddie believed the same. He trusted that once the project eased up and Zendaya's workload lightened, they would fall back into step. But time slipped by, and nothing shifted. That was when Vanessa arrived. She joined Eddie's department as a project manager, sharp, organized, energetic. She worked quickly and communicated clearly, and Eddie appreciated how easy it was to collaborate with her. She didn't replace anything in his life. She simply stood close enough to notice what was missing. One late evening led to another. Stress turned into shared complaints, and shared complaints turned into conversations that should have ended sooner. Eddie didn't seek anything from her. He told himself they were just talking, but the boundary between friendly and inappropriate thinned without him noticing. Vanessa listened as if his ideas were brilliant, laughed at jokes Zendaya had heard one too many times, and asked questions that made him feel seen in a way he hadn't felt in months. He ignored the first warning sign, lingering at her desk without needing to. Then the second, checking the time not because he wanted to go home, but because she was leaving soon and he'd grown used to matching her departure. He convinced himself it wasn't serious. But emotional shifts happen quietly, the kind that build under the surface until they're too heavy to hide. Zendaya sensed it before she could articulate it. She wasn't suspicious, just uneasy. Eddie began coming home later than usual, his explanations vague, his phone staying closer to his pocket than before. Things he used to leave on the counter, messages, screens, alerts, no longer appeared anywhere she could accidentally glimpse. One evening, Zendaya noticed Eddie tilt his phone away when a notification lit up. It lasted only a second, but the gesture struck her. Eddie had always been relaxed with his devices. Now he seemed protective. "Long day?" she asked gently, as she set dinner on the table. "Yeah, long." He didn't elaborate. She didn't push. She wanted to believe it was work, nothing more. But her instincts, quiet but persistent, warned her that something fundamental had shifted. She brushed them aside because she loved him, because she trusted him, and because the idea of anything else felt unbearable. Meanwhile, Eddie found himself slipping further without meaning to. A small compliment from Vanessa felt like validation. A laugh from her lifted stress he didn't know he was carrying. A conversation with her felt easier than the ones he now struggled to have at home. None of this excused anything, but it created a doorway, one he never should have walked through. The emotional distance between him and Zendaya widened with each passing week. She was tired, often coming home drained from museum events and outreach programs. Eddie, equally overwhelmed, lacked the energy to bridge the growing gap. When Zendaya tried initiating deeper conversations, he offered surface answers. When Eddie wanted quiet, Zendaya tried to understand without knowing what she was accommodating. Their 10th anniversary approached with a quiet sense of strain neither addressed. Zendaya planned their Mackinac Island getaway with the hope it would revive a spark they both missed. She imagined reconnecting, laughing again, rediscovering the version of them that seemed to have faded with time. Eddie canceled with a brief apology and a promise to make it up later. She hid her disappointment behind a tight smile. Small hurts like that began piling into something heavier. The turning point, though Zendaya didn't know it at the time, came on a Friday when Eddie didn't come home until after midnight. He explained that his team went out to celebrate meeting a deadline. Zendaya nodded, but something inside her tightened. Eddie had never been the type to go out drinking with coworkers, and certainly not for hours without checking in. He showered and went straight to bed, smelling faintly of perfume that wasn't hers. Zendaya lay awake staring at the ceiling. Her heart beat unevenly, but she told herself not to think too much, not to assume, not to accuse, not without proof. After all, they had been together for a decade. Eddie had never given her a reason to doubt him before. Maybe she was overreacting. Maybe exhaustion was making her emotional. But deep inside, she knew something was breaking. Not loudly, not suddenly, just slowly, like fabric wearing thin until one day it tears. Eddie, for his part, felt the shift too. Guilt crept in like a shadow each time he came home. He tried convincing himself nothing serious was happening, that the attraction he felt for Vanessa would fade, that he was just stressed, that Zendaya deserved better than someone who couldn't even articulate his confusion. But once an emotional line is crossed, the path back becomes harder to find. Days turned into weeks. Lies turned into half-truths. Distance turned into silence. Neither of them said it aloud, but the storm was already forming, and when it finally hit, it would change everything. Zendaya had always believed that the quiet moments in a home revealed the truth about a marriage. On that chilly October evening, the silence inside their Detroit house felt heavier than anything she had known. She stood at the kitchen counter drying the last plate from dinner, humming softly in an attempt to keep her nerves steady. Eddie sat at the table behind her, barely touching his food, his shoulders tight and restless. His fingers tapped a faint, uneven rhythm against the wooden surface. She sensed something was coming. She didn't know what, but the air felt uneasy. For weeks, months, if she was honest, Eddie's distance had grown, and Zendaya had tried to push aside her fears. But tonight, the truth hovered between them like a shadow refusing to move. "Zendaya," he said finally, his voice strained, "we need to talk." Those 4 words hit her with the force of a blow. She turned slowly, towel in her hand, trying to keep her expression calm even as her heartbeat jumped. "Okay," she replied, keeping her tone steady. "What's going on?" Eddie pushed back his chair and stood up, unable to stay still. He paced once, then stopped, rubbing his palms together as if trying to warm cold hands. His eyes didn't meet hers. I don't know how to say this," he began, struggling with each word, "but I need to be honest with you." Zendaya placed the towel on the counter, her eyes fixed on him as tension coiled in her chest. "Then just say it," she encouraged softly. Eddie took a shaky breath. "I haven't been happy for a long time." The words felt sharp, but she swallowed and tried to engage gently. "We've both been stressed. Work has been a lot. We can figure it out." He shook his head quickly. "It's not just stress, it's more than that." Her stomach tightened. She could feel the floor tilting beneath her, though she stood perfectly still. "Eddie, what are you trying to tell me?" His next words broke through every defense she had tried to build. "I met someone." Zendaya's vision blurred for a moment, as if her mind refused to process what she'd heard. She gripped the kitchen counter to ground herself. "What do you mean you met someone?" she asked quietly. He closed his eyes for a moment, then forced himself to look at her. "Her name is Vanessa. We worked together. It wasn't planned. It just happened." A wave of heat rose in Zendaya's chest. Shock, hurt, disbelief all crashing together. She blinked slowly, trying to hold herself together. "Eddie, please don't tell me this is what I think it is." He exhaled shakily. "I'm so sorry, Zendaya. I crossed a line." The kitchen felt suddenly cold, the hum of the refrigerator loud in the stillness. Her voice trembled as she asked, "Did you sleep with her?" Eddie hesitated, and that hesitation gave her the answer before he spoke. He lowered his head. "Yes." The word cut through her like glass. Zendaya felt her breath leave her body in a painful rush. 10 years together, years of laughter, support, holidays, shared dreams, felt as if they were collapsing at once. She pressed a hand to her forehead, trying to steady herself. "How long?" "A few times," he admitted quietly. "It made me realize how far apart we've grown." Zendaya let out a wounded, disbelieving sound. "You realize that by being with someone else?" Her voice cracked despite her attempt to stay composed. Eddie tried to step toward her, but she lifted a hand sharply to stop him. She couldn't bear for him to come closer. "I didn't mean to hurt you," he said desperately. "You did hurt me," she replied, her voice raw. "You shattered me." He swallowed hard, tears pooling in his eyes. "Zendaya, I think I'm in love with her." The words hung in the air, cruel and heavy. Zendaya stared at him, unable to speak. Her legs felt weak. She moved to the nearest chair and eased into it, her hands trembling in her lap. Eddie stood across from her, his breathing unsteady. "I'm sorry. I should have said something earlier, instead of letting things get this far." Tears slipped down Zendaya's cheeks, but she wiped them quickly, refusing to break completely in front of him. "We could have worked on things," she whispered. "But you didn't give us the chance." He sat down slowly, still keeping his distance. "I don't think fixing it is possible anymore. Not after what's happened." Zendaya raised her eyes to his, searching for any piece of the man she once knew. "So what are you saying?" Eddie exhaled, defeated. "I think we should end the marriage." Her heart clenched painfully. "You want a divorce?" He nodded, tears slipping down his own face now. "I do. I think it's the only way." Zendaya didn't speak at first. She stared at him with a mixture of heartbreak and disbelief, her entire world shifting beneath her feet. She had prepared herself for many difficult conversations throughout their marriage. After several moments, she whispered, "After everything we've been through, you're choosing her?" His voice broke as he answered, "I'm choosing what I think will make me happy." Zendaya pressed her lips together to keep from crying out. She stood slowly, steadying herself against the table. "If that's what you want, then go." Her voice was firm, but her heart felt as if it had cracked open. Eddie looked at her helplessly, regret etched across his face. But he didn't retract the words. They were already out. The damage was already done. And just like that, the life they built, the marriage they fought for, the memories they cherished, began to crumble right there in their Detroit kitchen. Zendaya didn't remember grabbing her keys. She didn't remember slipping on her shoes or opening the front door. All she knew was that the air inside the house had become too heavy, too suffocating to bear another second. Eddie's confession, the affair, the feelings, the divorce, echoed in her mind like a relentless drumbeat. She stepped out into the night, the cold stinging her skin as if the world itself was reacting to her pain. She made it to her car before the tears finally broke through. They came in violent waves, shaking her entire body as she leaned forward against the steering wheel. 10 years. A decade of memories, loyalty, forgiveness, shared dreams, crushed in minutes. Her breath came out in staggered gasps. She tried to calm herself, but the betrayal tore through her chest with a force she couldn't describe. She didn't trust herself to drive. She could barely see through the blur of tears. Her hands trembled as she fumbled for her phone, scrolling to the one person she knew would answer no matter the hour, Monica. Monica picked up on the second ring, her usual lively tone immediately shifting when she heard Zendaya's broken breathing. "Zen? What happened? Are you all right?" Zendaya tried to speak, but only a choked sob came out. She forced herself to breathe enough to manage, "Mon. I can't. Eddie." The silence on the other end was sharp, then Monica's voice grew urgent. "Where are you? Are you at home?" "In my car," Zendaya whispered. "I left." "Good. Don't go anywhere. I'm on my way." Zendaya nodded, though Monica couldn't see her. She lowered the phone and stared blankly through the windshield, her mind spinning. Her chest felt tight, as if her heart was folding in on itself. She tried to focus on her breathing, but each inhale seemed to hurt more than the last. The porch light of her own home glowed a few feet away, making everything feel even more surreal. Eddie was inside. Eddie, who had just told her he loved another woman. Eddie, who had once promised her the world and now wanted to walk away from it. By the time Monica pulled up behind her, Zendaya's tears had slowed to a soft, steady stream. Monica rushed toward her, throwing open the car door and pulling her into a hug before a single word could be exchanged. Zendaya collapsed into her arms. "He wants a divorce," she cried. "He's been with someone else." They stood there for a moment, Zendaya's tears soaking Monica's shoulder as the cool Detroit night wrapped around them. Eventually, Monica guided her into the passenger seat of her car, shutting the door gently. "Come on," Monica said softly. "You're staying with me tonight." The short drive felt long. Zendaya stared out the window, numb, her mind replaying every detail of the last hour. She thought of their wedding day, Eddie's trembling voice when he said his vows. She thought of the night they bought their house, sitting on the living room floor, eating takeout on paper plates, celebrating a future they believed in. How did we get here? How did he stop loving me? Monica reached over and squeezed her hand. "Don't blame yourself," she said firmly, as if reading Zendaya's thoughts. But the guilt had already begun to creep in. Was it the long work nights? The time she came home exhausted? The months they stopped talking deeply? She wondered how long Eddie had been slipping away while she tried to pretend everything was fine. At Monica's apartment, the warmth of the living room hit Zendaya instantly. Monica wrapped her in a soft blanket and brought her a mug of tea, placing it carefully into her hands. Zendaya held it, letting the heat seep into her palms, grounding her. For several minutes, neither spoke. The room was quiet except for Zendaya's sniffles and the distant hum of traffic from outside. Finally, Monica sat beside her. "Tell me everything." Zendaya took a shaky breath and recounted the nightmare. Every word Eddie said, every expression on his face, every moment she felt her world collapsing. Monica listened silently, her expression shifting from shock to pain to controlled anger. "That man," Monica said slowly, "has lost his mind." Zendaya managed a small, broken laugh through her tears. "But listen to me," Monica continued, taking her hands gently. "You didn't deserve this. You gave him everything. You loved him the right way. He's the one who threw that away." Zendaya looked down at her tea. "I don't know what to do." "You don't need to know tonight. Just breathe," Monica said. "Tomorrow you'll figure out your next move. But tonight you rest." Zendaya nodded, but her thoughts refused to settle. As she sat wrapped in the blanket, the weight of what had happened pressed down on her. She imagined Eddie pacing in the house, maybe feeling guilt, maybe thinking about Vanessa. The idea alone sent another stab of pain through her chest. Yet beneath the heartbreak, beneath the grief, something else slowly formed, a faint spark of clarity. Not anger, not revenge. Something different. She didn't want her marriage to end with confusion, chaos, and unanswered questions. She needed space, time, and something concrete before she could accept the end of a decade-long bond. She needed one last chance, on her own terms. As the idea took shape, she whispered quietly to herself, "I can't let 10 years disappear just like that. Not without trying something first." Monica looked at her curiously. "What are you thinking?" Zendaya wiped her tears, her voice steadier now, though still soft. I know what I need to do before I sign anything." The plan wasn't fully formed yet, but it was emerging. Clear enough to give her something she hadn't had since Eddie said the word divorce. A sense of direction. A sense of control. A shocking response no one, not even Eddie, would see coming. The next afternoon, Zendaya stood outside her home with her keys in hand, her heart pounding steadily against her ribs. She had spent the night drifting in and out of sleep on Monica's couch, her mind replaying Eddie's confession again and again. But alongside the heartbreak, her plan had solidified. She wasn't going back to fight, and she wasn't going back to beg. She was going back to reclaim her voice. The house looked the same as it always did. Neatly trimmed lawn, the welcome mat slightly crooked from Eddie's hurried steps the night before. But today, stepping inside felt like entering a place she no longer recognized. When she opened the door, Eddie was sitting on the couch, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor as if it held all the answers he didn't have. At the sound of her steps, he looked up quickly. His eyes were swollen, his face pale. "I'm here to talk," she said, her voice calm but firm. She slipped out of her coat and hung it on the hook, her movements deliberate. Eddie nodded and sat back down, though he looked like he couldn't settle. Zendaya joined him on the opposite end of the couch, leaving space between them. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence wasn't the kind that bound them together like it once did. It was the kind that separated two people trying to find footing in a broken moment. Finally, Zendaya inhaled deeply. "Eddie, I thought about everything you said last night. About the affair, about the divorce." He flinched at the word, swallowing hard. "I'm sorry," he murmured. Zendaya lifted a hand. "Please let me finish." He nodded quickly. She continued, steady and controlled. "I heard you. I processed it. And I'm not going to pretend I wasn't shattered. But I also realized something." Eddie watched her intently, as if bracing for another ending he wasn't prepared to face. "I'm not ready to throw 10 years away," she said gently. "Not like this. Not overnight. Not without knowing that we truly tried everything." Eddie blinked, taken by surprise. "Zendaya, I don't understand. After what I did, why would you even want to try?" She looked down at her hands, choosing her words carefully. "Because you were my partner for a decade. Because we built a life together. Because somewhere deep in this mess there's something worth giving one last chance." He exhaled slowly, his shoulders lowering a fraction. "So," she said, lifting her gaze to his, "I'm proposing something." His eyes narrowed slightly, confused but attentive. "What is it?" 1 month, Zendaya said. 30 days. We stay married, we stay in this house, and we act like a married couple again. We focus on us, talking, reconnecting, doing things together. If, after 1 month, you still want a divorce, I won't fight it. I'll sign whatever you want. Eddie stared at her as if she had spoken another language. You're serious? He rubbed his forehead, overwhelmed. Zendaya, I don't know what to say. There's more, she said. His eyes lifted again, uncertain. Go on. For this month to mean anything, we need rules. Eddie nodded slowly. Okay, Rule 1, Zendaya said, her tone clear. No contact with Vanessa. None. Not a call, not a message, not a goodbye meeting. Nothing. If we're doing this, she cannot be involved in any part of it. Eddie's jaw tightened. He looked down for a moment, then nodded. I understand, and I agree. Rule 2, she continued, is honesty, real honesty. If something hurts you, you say it. If you feel disconnected, say it. If you remember what you love about us, you say that too. No pretending just to make the month pass. Eddie swallowed. Okay, I can do that. And Rule 3, Zendaya said softly, is participation. Full effort. No sitting quietly and letting me do all the work. We go places together. We talk. We sleep in the same room unless one of us needs space, and even then we discuss it. Eddie sat back, processing everything. His eyes were glossy with emotion. This is a lot to take in. I know, Zendaya replied gently. But it's the only way I can move forward, whether that means rebuilding or walking away. The room fell quiet again, but this time it wasn't sharp or painful. It was contemplative. Eddie finally spoke, voice trembling. I don't deserve this chance. Maybe not, Zendaya said honestly. But I'm offering it anyway. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, clasping his hands together. Zendaya? I'm so sorry for everything I put you through. If you want this month, then I'll give it every bit of effort I have. I'll cut ties with Vanessa right now. I'll do whatever it takes to show you I'm serious. Zendaya nodded, relief touching her features. Thank you. Eddie hesitated for a moment before asking, when do we start? Zendaya exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the moment settle around them. Today? Right now. If we're doing this, we begin here. Eddie nodded again and stood, retrieving his phone from the table. She watched quietly as he powered it on, scrolled for a moment, then typed something out. He didn't hide the screen. He didn't step out of the room. He didn't hesitate. A few seconds later he hit send, then turned the phone off completely. It's done, he said softly. No more contact. Zendaya nodded once. She didn't smile, but something inside her loosened. Just slightly. Eddie walked back toward her, stopping a respectful distance away. Thank you for giving us this chance. I won't waste it. Zendaya stood as well, her heart still fragile but steady. We'll see where this month takes us. For the first time since the night before, the house didn't feel like a battlefield. A place where something might still be salvaged, if they both chose to fight for it. And so, with the simplest agreement and the hardest promises, the 1-month deal began. The first full day of their trial month felt like stepping into unfamiliar territory, even though they had lived in that Detroit house together for nearly a decade. Everything looked the same. Same kitchen tiles, same framed photos on the hallway wall, but the atmosphere had shifted. It wasn't broken anymore, but it wasn't repaired either. It was something in between, something tentative, something fragile. Zendaya stood at the stove preparing dinner, stirring a pot of Alfredo sauce. Cooking for Eddie again felt strange. Not painful, but cautious. She caught herself wondering if she should make conversation, or let the silence breathe. She settled somewhere in between, glancing over her shoulder when she heard Eddie behind her. He was setting the table, placing each fork carefully, as if arranging delicate instruments. Do you want sparkling water, or lemonade? He asked, his voice soft but steady. Lemonade is fine, she replied. He nodded, almost relieved to have a simple task he could complete correctly. When they finally sat down to eat, the silence pressed around them again. Zendaya took a slow bite of pasta. Eddie did the same. They weren't avoiding each other. They were observing each other, adjusting, trying to navigate a space that once felt natural. "So," Zendaya began gently, "how was work today?" Eddie blinked, surprised she had initiated conversation. "It was different," he admitted. "Quiet. I kept to myself." She knew what he meant. Vanessa was out of the picture now. That realization brought a strange mix of relief and heaviness. "I'm sure it'll take some getting used to," Zendaya said calmly. "Yeah," he replied, then hesitated. "Thank you for doing this dinner. I know it isn't easy." Zendaya looked at him for a moment, then nodded silently. "We agreed to try, and that includes dinners. It's part of the deal." He offered a small smile, an unsure one, but genuine. They ate a few more bites before he added, "It's really good, by the way." "Thanks," Zendaya said, allowing a faint smile of her own. It wasn't warmth. It wasn't comfort. But it was something. After dinner, they loaded the dishwasher together. Their movements weren't coordinated like they once were. Zendaya would step left, Eddie would step right, and they'd lightly bump shoulders before stepping apart with shy apologies. Eventually, Eddie let out a small laugh at the awkwardness, and Zendaya found herself chuckling too. "Feels like we're roommates trying to pretend we know each other," Eddie said with a half grin. Zendaya shrugged lightly. "Well, we're relearning. That's part of the point, isn't it?" "Yeah," he replied softly. "I guess it is." When bedtime approached, the air shifted again. Entering the bedroom meant facing a past that felt too close, too familiar, too wounded. Eddie lingered near the door, unsure. "I can sleep on the couch if you prefer," he offered carefully. Zendaya thought for a moment. "No," she said gently. "The deal was that we try to live normally. You can stay." He nodded, visibly relieved but still cautious. They both changed into their sleep clothes quietly, each turned away from the other. Zendaya climbed into her side of the bed, staying near the edge at first. Eddie slipped into his side, leaving a respectful amount of space. The room settled into darkness. For several minutes neither spoke. The only sounds were the faint hum of the heater and their slow breathing. Then Eddie whispered, "Thank you for letting me stay here." Zendaya kept her eyes closed. "It's part of the month." A pause. "I know," he murmured, "but still." Zendaya wasn't ready to respond to that. So she didn't. But she also didn't pull away when he slightly shifted his position, turning toward her even though he kept his distance. It took time, but eventually, exhaustion pulled her into sleep. The next morning began differently. Eddie woke up early and quietly slipped out of the room. When Zendaya walked into the kitchen, she paused mid-step. Eddie was standing at the stove, flipping French toast with an intensity usually reserved for engineering work. He glanced over his shoulder and nearly fumbled the spatula. "Oh, good morning. I made breakfast." "Well, I tried." Zendaya approached slowly. The toast was slightly uneven, some pieces crispier than others, but the effort softened something inside her. "You didn't have to do that," she said gently. "I wanted to," he replied. "It's been a long time since I did anything like this." She took a forkful. "It's good." He brightened a little. "Really? It doesn't taste burnt?" "No," she chuckled. "It's actually good, Eddie." The ease between them was still fragile, but moments like these, small, simple, unforced, began knitting them together in ways she didn't expect. Later that evening, they sat in the living room watching a comedy show. At first, they kept to their sides of the couch. But during a funny scene where the main character slipped on a rug, blamed the rug itself, Eddie let out an unexpected laugh, a real one. Zendaya couldn't help laughing too. Their shoulders brushed lightly. For a brief second, they both went still. Then Zendaya smiled. "I'd forgotten how loud your laugh can be." Eddie scratched the back of his neck shyly. "Yeah, it's been a while since anything felt funny." Zendaya's smile softened. "Well, laughing is allowed this month." He looked at her, something warm flickering in his eyes. "Thank you, Zen." Her heart tensed at the nickname, one he hadn't used in months. She didn't ask him to stop. By the end of the first week, the awkwardness hadn't disappeared, but it had shifted. They spoke more. They sat closer. Eddie didn't hide his phone. Zendaya didn't feel the urge to check it, and for the first time since everything shattered, there were flickers, tiny, fragile sparks, of the connection they once had. Not healed, not perfect, but undeniably returning. By the second week, the rhythm of the trial month began to take shape. It was still delicate, like walking across a thin sheet of ice, but Zendaya and Eddie were learning how to navigate their new, uncertain dynamic. There were moments when silence felt heavy, but there were also moments when it felt warm again, familiar in ways Zendaya hadn't expected. One afternoon, as she returned home from work, she found Eddie in the kitchen holding 2 menus. He straightened when he saw her, eyes hopeful but cautious. "I was thinking," he began, rubbing his thumb nervously along the edge of the paper. "Maybe we could go out tonight? Like an actual date?" Zendaya raised an eyebrow. "A date?" "Yeah," he said, clearing his throat. "Dinner, your choice, anywhere." The offer surprised her. Not because of the idea itself, but because of how he said it. Careful, sincere, almost vulnerable. She studied him for a moment before nodding. "Okay," she agreed softly. "Let's do dinner." They ended up choosing a new sushi restaurant downtown. Zendaya remembered how years ago Eddie once swore he'd never eat raw fish unless stranded on an island. Yet tonight, he dressed neatly and didn't complain once. The hostess led them to a small table by the window overlooking the city lights. As they sat down, Zendaya could feel Eddie's eyes drift toward her more than once. When she finally glanced up, he smiled shyly. "You look beautiful," he said. She felt warmth rise in her cheeks. "Thank you." Their conversation started slowly, focusing on safe topics. Work updates, neighborhood changes, a funny commercial Eddie had seen that morning. But as the dishes began to arrive, the tension eased. Zendaya tried a spicy roll and immediately reached for her water, coughing. Eddie laughed, covering his mouth mid-chuckle, and she nudged him playfully. "Oh, don't laugh at me," she said, smiling. "I'm sorry," he chuckled, "but your face. You looked betrayed by the food." Zendaya shook her head, but she couldn't stop smiling. It felt easy, natural, almost like the couple they used to be, before life had worn them down. After dinner, Eddie surprised her again. "Do you want to stop by Baker's?" he asked gently. Zendaya's heart skipped. Baker's Keyboard Lounge had been their spot, the place where they'd spent countless date nights listening to smooth jazz and dancing in dim golden light. "You want to go?" she asked. He nodded. "Only if you do." She hesitated a moment, then nodded back. Inside the club, the warm hum of bass greeted them. The air carried hints of cologne, soft chatter, and the familiar rhythm of a saxophone warming up on stage. The lighting was low, intimate. Zendaya inhaled deeply, nostalgia washing over her. They found a small table near the stage. The band began playing a slow, soulful number that echoed memories of happier days. Eddie watched her carefully. "Want to dance?" he asked. Her breath caught slightly, not in fear, but in something softer, something familiar. She placed her hand in his, and they moved to the dance floor. Eddie pulled her close, respectfully but gently, his hand resting against her back. Zendaya's chest tightened. This embrace, once nightly, once casual and comforting, felt strangely new again. They swayed in slow movements, their steps quiet, their breath steady. At one point, Zendaya's head lightly rested against his shoulder, not deliberately, but not accidentally either. Eddie closed his eyes briefly, as if afraid to ruin the moment. Zendaya's fingers tightened slightly around his. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was acknowledgement. They stayed until the last song finished. When they stepped outside into the crisp night air, their hands brushed. Neither pulled away. That Sunday, Zendaya asked Eddie if he'd like to come to church with her. It was an important part of her life, a place that had carried her through childhood, adulthood, grief, and joy. It symbolized her roots, her values, her peace. Inviting him again was a step she didn't take lightly. "I'd like that," he said immediately. At the service, familiar faces greeted them. Mrs. Johnson wrapped both in warm hugs, saying, "It's been a while." Zendaya smiled politely, keeping the deeper truth private. Eddie remained respectful and steady beside her. During the sermon, the pastor spoke about mending what's broken and choosing to show grace when hearts are tired. Zendaya felt the words land heavy in her chest. Eddie noticed. He reached over and gently took her hand. She let him. After church, they joined Zendaya's family for Sunday dinner. Aunt Viv cooked enough food to feed a small army, as usual. The table buzzed with conversation. Eddie tried to appear relaxed, but Zendaya could sense the tension under his polite smile. Her family didn't know anything about the affair, and she planned to keep it that way for now. But Eddie's guilt was evident in the way he avoided prolonged eye contact. Still, when her younger cousins teased him about not knowing how to season chicken properly, he laughed along, even joking back, "I'm sticking to French toast. That's my specialty now." Zendaya smiled. It was the first time in months she'd seen him interact naturally with her family again. Later that evening, as they drove home, Eddie spoke softly. "Your family. They always make me feel welcome. Even now. I don't know if I deserve it." Zendaya looked out the window, thoughtful. "They love you because you became part of my life. That doesn't disappear overnight." He nodded slowly. "I want to be worthy of that again." Zendaya didn't answer right away, but something inside her softened at the sincerity in his voice. The second week closed with a quiet evening on the couch. They watched a movie. Nothing romantic, nothing heavy. Just something to fill the space. At one point, Zendaya laughed at a joke on screen, and Eddie turned toward her, watching her laugh as if it was something rare and precious. She noticed. She pretended she didn't. Rebuilding wasn't easy, and forgiveness wasn't guaranteed. But the dinners, the laughter, the church visit, the dance, they were becoming stepping stones, small, steady pieces of a larger possibility. The last day of their 30-day agreement arrived quietly, without fanfare, without any dramatic shift in the air. Yet both Zendaya and Eddie felt the weight of it from the moment they woke up. The morning light filtering through their bedroom curtains wasn't just another sunrise. It was a countdown, a final marker that every moment that followed would matter. Zendaya moved around the kitchen preparing breakfast, her motions calm but deliberate. Eddie watched her from the doorway, unsure whether to step forward or keep his distance. Every day this past month he had grown a little closer, but today he didn't trust his own emotions. He didn't want to disrupt the fragile balance they had gained. "Coffee?" Zendaya asked softly, not turning around. "Yes, please," Eddie replied. Their eyes met only briefly when she handed him the mug, both aware that the end of the trial month hovered between them like a question waiting to be answered. Later that afternoon, Zendaya suggested they go for a walk. It was the same neighborhood they had walked through countless times over the years, but today the sidewalks felt different. Every step carried memories of their first winter in the house, of summer evenings spent laughing on their porch, of quiet moments they once mistook for stability. The October air was cool, crisp, the trees lining the street dressed in shades of orange and deep red. Zendaya wrapped her arms around herself as they walked, not from cold but from nerves. Eddie, hands shoved in his jacket pockets, kept glancing at her with a mixture of admiration and fear. They didn't talk at first. Their footsteps filled the silence, rhythmic against the pavement. Eventually Zendaya exhaled deeply. "So, it's been a month," she said, her voice steady despite the tightness in her chest. Eddie nodded. "Yeah, it has. Have you thought about what you want to do?" He stopped walking. She did too, turning to face him beneath a tall tree whose leaves were slowly drifting to the ground. He looked at her for a long moment, his expression softening. "I've thought about it every day," he admitted quietly. "Every hour, if I'm honest." Zendaya's throat tightened, but she kept her gaze fixed on his. "And?" she asked. Eddie took a breath, the kind that signaled a truth he could no longer hold inside. "I choose you," he said, the words trembling but firm. "I choose our marriage, I choose the life we built. I want to stay with you, Zendaya." Her breath hitched. He stepped closer. Not too close, but enough for her to feel the sincerity radiating from him. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," he continued, "but I want to spend the rest of my life earning it. This month made me realize how much I threw away. I felt it every single day because being near you again reminded me of the man I used to be, the man I want to be again." Zendaya's eyes grew glassy. She looked down briefly, gathering herself. "You hurt me deeply, Eddie," she whispered. "I know," he said, his voice breaking. "And I will live with that. But I want to rebuild what I destroyed. I love you, Zendaya. I never stopped loving you. I just lost myself and didn't know how to find my way back." The honesty in his voice was raw, vulnerable, real. Zendaya stepped closer, lifting her eyes to his. She searched his face, looking for doubt, hesitation, any sign that this was a momentary emotional surge, but she found none. Only clarity. "I needed to hear that," she said softly. "I needed to know that you're choosing us because you want to, not because you feel guilty, or because the month forced you to think about it." Eddie shook his head. "This isn't guilt. This is me finally seeing what I almost destroyed, and knowing I can't lose you." Zendaya breathed slowly, letting his words settle. After a moment she nodded, just once. Her heart wasn't fully healed, but it was open, and that mattered. "Then if you truly choose us," she said, "you know what comes next." Eddie nodded again. "I have to end it with Vanessa." "Completely," Zendaya said gently but firmly. "No messages, no loose ends, no confusion." "Completely," he repeated. "You have my word." When they returned home, Zendaya waited in the living room while Eddie stepped into the bedroom with his phone. She didn't try to listen, but she could hear muffled tones. His quiet voice speaking carefully, her voice rising faintly through the speaker in frustration or disbelief. It didn't last long. Eddie kept his voice steady, respectful, and final. A few minutes later he stepped back into the living room, pale but resolved. "It's done," he said softly. "I told her it's over and that there won't be any further contact." Zendaya nodded. Relief wasn't immediate. Trust isn't rebuilt in one moment, but there was a settling in her chest, a release of pressure she didn't realize she'd been carrying. "Thank you," she whispered. Eddie approached her cautiously, giving her space to move away if she needed to. When she didn't, he gently took her hands. "What happens next?" he asked quietly. Zendaya squeezed his fingers. "We rebuild. Slowly. Carefully. Together." Zendaya gave a small, soft smile. The first true smile she'd offered him in a long time. "Then let's go inside," she said. "We have a lot of life ahead of us." Eddie nodded, and for the first time in months, they stepped into their home not as two people drifting apart, but as two people choosing each other again. The trial month had ended. The real work, and real healing, was just beginning. Committing to stay together was one thing. Learning how to heal was another entirely. After Eddie chose Zendaya and cut ties with Vanessa for good, they both knew the next step wasn't just about affection or effort. It was about rebuilding trust from the ground up, brick by careful brick. Their first counseling session took place on a Thursday evening. The waiting room was warm and minimal, soft music playing in the background. Eddie sat beside Zendaya, hands clasped tightly in his lap. She sat with her back straight, her expression composed but distant. They looked like a couple who had been through a war and weren't quite sure how to return to peace. When the counselor welcomed them in, they sat side by side on the small couch. The space felt safe but unfamiliar. Zendaya inhaled deeply, preparing herself. The counselor began gently. "I'd like to start with a simple question. Why are you both here?" Zendaya spoke first. "Because we've been through a lot. Something broke between us, and before we decide anything final, we want to see if it can be repaired." "And how's the trust right now?" the counselor asked. Zendaya's jaw tightened slightly. "Fragile?" Eddie looked down. "I know I caused that." The counselor nodded, encouraging them to continue. "Those early sessions were difficult. emotionally draining, sometimes painfully honest. They discussed communication, unmet needs, and the distance that grew between them long before Vanessa came into the picture. Zendaya spoke about feeling unseen, unheard, and overwhelmed. Eddie spoke about feeling inadequate and ashamed of his setbacks at work. There were moments when Zendaya cried quietly, her tears controlled but full of meaning. Eddie never interrupted. He listened, hands trembling. There were moments when Eddie's voice cracked as he admitted the fears he never spoke aloud, that he felt he wasn't good enough for her, that he feared disappointing her, that he drifted because he was lost, not because he didn't love her. Counseling forced them into conversations they had avoided for years. Hard conversations, honest conversations. But in those moments of vulnerability, something important began to shift. They weren't just talking, they were finally hearing each other. Outside of the counselor's office, life began to change in subtle, steady ways. Transparency became normal. Eddie no longer kept his phone face down. He no longer took it with him to the bathroom or tense up whenever a notification appeared. Zendaya didn't ask to see it. She didn't want to police him, but the openness helped ease the tension in her heart. If she walked by the counter and saw messages from coworkers or family, nothing felt hidden. Eddie updated Zendaya about his workday without being prompted. Zendaya shared what stressed her, instead of keeping everything tucked inside. Slowly, the invisible wall between them thinned. Communication became intentional. They started ending each night with 10 minutes of conversation. Nothing forced, nothing heavy unless needed. Sometimes they spoke about their day. Sometimes they discussed the hard things. Sometimes they laughed about old memories. What mattered was consistency. One evening, Eddie said quietly, "I didn't realize how far I pulled away until I saw how much I was missing." Zendaya didn't respond right away. She simply placed her hand over his, a small gesture, but a meaningful one. Another night, Zendaya admitted, "I stopped telling you when I felt overwhelmed. I didn't want to add pressure." "I wish you had," Eddie whispered. "I didn't want you to carry everything alone." Their conversations weren't always smooth. Some ended in silence, some ended in tears, but every one brought them a little closer. Counseling also gave Eddie tools he hadn't had before. He learned how to articulate feelings he once kept buried. He learned how to listen without becoming defensive. He learned that commitment wasn't just about love, it was about presence, reliability, and daily effort. Zendaya learned how to express needs without fear of sounding demanding. She learned how to set boundaries without shutting down emotionally. She learned that forgiving someone didn't mean pretending the pain never existed. It meant acknowledging the hurt while choosing to move forward. By the 4th week of counseling, the air between them felt noticeably different, lighter, steadier. There was one session where the counselor asked them to describe one thing they appreciated about each other that week. Zendaya thought for a moment before saying softly, "I appreciate the way he shows up now. Every day, even when it's uncomfortable." Eddie's eyes glossed. "I appreciate her patience, and the grace she shows me, even when I don't feel like I deserve it." The counselor nodded. "You're rebuilding something meaningful. Slowly, but meaningfully." At home, their routine became a comforting pattern. They cooked dinner together more often, moving around the kitchen with growing ease. Eddie began joining Zendaya on her morning walks before work. Zendaya occasionally sat beside Eddie as he tinkered with tools in the garage, learning about the small things he enjoyed fixing. Trust didn't return overnight, but it returned in moments, like the morning Eddie texted, running late, meeting with the boss. "We'll be home by 6, a message he didn't have to send but chose to. Or when Zendaya came home early and found Eddie reading one of the counseling books, underlining passages quietly. Or when Eddie smiled gently and said, "I'm proud of you," after Zendaya led a successful event at the museum. None of these moments erased the past, but they built a future. By the end of their 4th month of counseling, the shift was undeniable. Zendaya no longer feared checking the clock when Eddie was late. Eddie no longer felt like he was walking on uneven ground. Their breathing matched again, slow, steady, shared. They weren't healed, but they were healing. And for the first time in a long time, both believed they had something worth fighting for together. As Zendaya and Eddie continued rebuilding quietly, life outside their home began shifting too. Healing wasn't just about the two of them. It touched their families, their friendships, their daily routines. What once felt fragile now began expanding outward, pulling in the people who had held them together during the darkest moments. For the first few months after the trial period, Zendaya had kept everything private. Her family saw the two of them together again, smiling here and there, moving with something that looked like renewed harmony. But they didn't know the truth. That changed one Sunday afternoon, during a family dinner at Aunt Viv's house. The living room bustled with cousins arguing over games, uncles discussing sports, and the smell of seasoned chicken filling every corner. Zendaya sat beside Eddie on the couch, her fingers lightly resting on her knee. She could tell he was nervous. His posture was straighter than usual, his breaths more careful. Aunt Viv had always been perceptive, one of those relatives who could sense emotion the moment someone walked in. She approached them after dinner was served, wiping her hands on a towel, eyes sharp but warm. "Baby," she said to Zendaya, "you've been quiet these past few months. And you too?" Her gaze shifted between them. "Something's different. What's going on?" Zendaya took a breath. "Aunt Viv, we went through something hard, and we're working on it." Aunt Viv didn't miss the way Zendaya's voice softened or the way Eddie lowered his eyes slightly. "What kind of hard?" she pressed. Zendaya hesitated, then spoke steadily. "There was a betrayal. Eddie had to make a choice, and now we're rebuilding." Aunt Viv turned her full attention to Eddie. Her expression wasn't angry. It was stern, rooted in love for her niece. "You hurt her?" she asked calmly. Eddie swallowed. "Yes, and I regret it every day. I'm working to be better. For her. For us." Aunt Viv held his gaze for a long moment. "Do you understand what you almost threw away?" "Yes," Eddie said, voice low. "I do." Aunt Viv nodded slowly, then surprised him by placing a hand gently on his shoulder. "Good. Then don't let it happen again. Zendaya deserves a man who stands beside her, not one she has to heal from." Eddie's eyes glistened. "I won't fail her again?" Zendaya felt a wave of emotion, relief at the honesty, gratitude for her aunt's strength, pride in Eddie's humility. Meanwhile, Monica's relationship with Eddie had its own journey. She had always been fiercely protective of Zendaya, and when she learned about the affair months earlier, she kept her distance from him entirely. The first time Eddie walked into Zendaya's nonprofit event to support her, Monica spotted him from across the room. Her eyes narrowed slightly. She approached Zendaya first. "He's here?" she asked quietly. "Yes," Zendaya answered. "He's supporting the event." Monica crossed her arms. "I'm watching him." "I know," Zendaya said with a small smile. Monica eventually made her way to Eddie, who stood by a display board, hands clasped. She stopped in front of him, raising her chin slightly. "Eddie—" "Monica," he said respectfully. "You know I love Zendaya like a sister," she stated plainly. "I know," he replied, "and you know I was ready to slash your tires when I heard what you did." Eddie blinked. "I didn't know that, but I believe it." Monica cracked a reluctant smile. "Good. Because you deserved it back then." Eddie nodded, accepting that truth. "But," she continued, "I also see the work you're doing. I see the effort." Zendaya smiles again. "That matters." "It matters to me too," Eddie said softly. Monica studied him a moment longer, then held out her hand. "You keep treating her right. You keep showing up. If you slip even once, there won't be a trial run next time." "Understood?" Eddie shook her hand firmly. "Understood." Zendaya watched from across the room, her heart warming at the sight. The two most important people in her support system were beginning to coexist again, not perfectly, but with respect. As their relationships with others healed, new routines blossomed in their home life as well. Eddie began supporting Zendaya's nonprofit work more consistently. He volunteered at events, helped with setup, and even used his engineering skills to repair equipment and build displays. Seeing him invest in something meaningful to her reminded Zendaya of the man she fell in love with, the man who always wanted to uplift her dreams. One afternoon at a community youth workshop, she watched him kneel beside a group of students, explaining how simple mechanics worked. The kids listened intently, their eyes wide with curiosity. Zendaya felt her chest tighten, not with pain, but with admiration. Later that night, she told him, "You were amazing with them today." Eddie rubbed the back of his neck shyly. "I just like helping out. And they loved you," she added warmly. He smiled, a soft blush rising. It felt good, being useful, being part of your world again. Zendaya reached for his hand and he intertwined their fingers naturally, something that didn't happen easily months before. Zendaya also began embracing Eddie's hobbies, something she hadn't done consistently in the past. One Saturday morning, he invited her into the garage while he worked on restoring an old motorcycle, a project he'd paused for months when their marriage began falling apart. She sat beside him on a stool, curious. "So what exactly are we fixing today?" Eddie grinned. "The carburetor. Kind of the heart of the bike. Want to help?" Zendaya shrugged lightly. "Teach me." He talked her through each part, showing her the tools, guiding her hands. Their shoulders brushed occasionally. And for the first time in a long time, the physical closeness didn't feel tense. It felt natural, warm. At one point she accidentally dropped a screw, and it rolled across the floor with a loud clink. Zendaya burst into laughter, and Eddie joined her. "You're doing great," he teased. "Sure I am," she said, still laughing. "Professional screwdropper." The laughter echoed through the garage, light, free, healing. Their new routines didn't erase the past, but they created a foundation for a healthier future. Counseling gave them tools. Family gave them accountability. Friends gave them perspective, and their everyday moments gave them hope. Slowly, steadily, their marriage moved from fragile survival to intentional rebuilding, to something real again. By the time late spring arrived, Zendaya and Eddie had formed a rhythm that felt both familiar and brand new. Their connection, once fractured and trembling, had grown stronger through months of intentional healing. Counseling gave them tools. Conversations built understanding, and their everyday choices proved commitment. But one evening, Eddie realized there was still something missing, a moment that honored not just their past, but the future they were reshaping. He wanted to give Zendaya a symbol of the life they were choosing again. It happened during a quiet night at home. They sat together on the couch, watching one of Zendaya's favorite old films. She leaned into him, comfortably now, not cautiously. His arm rested behind her, fingers lightly tracing the fabric of the cushion instead of pulling away in fear of doing too much. Halfway through the movie, Zendaya fell asleep, her head gently resting on Eddie's shoulder. He looked down at her, really looked, and felt a surge of gratitude so strong he had to take a breath. Months ago, she couldn't sit beside him without flinching. Now she slept peacefully leaning against him. He brushed a strand of hair from her forehead, his touch soft, careful. In that moment, he understood exactly what he needed to do. The next day, Eddie drove to Belle Isle Park, walking slowly across the grass toward the spot where they had exchanged vows years earlier. It was by the fountain, her favorite location, where the water glittered under the sun and framed the city beautifully behind them. He remembered standing there with her, nervous and excited, promising a lifetime he believed he could protect. But he hadn't protected it, not the way he should have. He stood at the same place, the breeze cool against his face, and whispered into the air, "I want to do it right this time." That night, after dinner, Eddie took Zendaya's hand and guided her to the living room. She raised an eyebrow, curious but calm. "What's going on?" she asked with a small smile. Eddie took a breath. "There's something I want to ask you." Her expression shifted, softening, attentive, hopeful yet guarded. He moved to stand in front of her, gently holding both her hands. "Zendaya, this past year has changed me. Counseling changed me. You changed me. But nothing made me feel more grateful than the fact that you chose to fight for us when walking away would have been easier." Zendaya's eyes shimmered, her lips parting slightly. "I hurt you," Eddie continued, voice thick with emotion. "I broke something sacred. And even though we've been rebuilding, I know there's still a piece of our journey we need to reclaim together." Zendaya gasped softly, one hand rising to cover her mouth. "Zendaya, will you renew our vows with me?" Eddie asked. "Not to erase the past, but to honor everything we've overcome, and everything we still want to create together." For a moment she couldn't speak. Tears slid silently down her cheeks, soft tears, not from heartbreak, but from healing. She lowered her hands and cupped his face gently. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Eddie. I would love that." He exhaled shakily, his forehead resting softly against her stomach as relief washed over him. Zendaya placed her hands on his shoulders, grounding him, embracing the moment. They chose Belle Isle for the ceremony, just as Eddie knew she would. It wasn't large or extravagant. Zendaya didn't want a crowd, and Eddie didn't want anything that distracted from the meaning of the moment. Just a few close loved ones, a warm sunset, and the steady hum of the fountain behind them. On the day of the renewal, Zendaya wore a soft cream dress that flowed gently with the breeze. Eddie wore a simple suit that matched the tone of their original wedding. Classic, understated, sincere. Monica helped adjust Zendaya's hair, teasing lightly, "Girl, you're marrying the same man again." "That's loyalty." Aunt Viv chuckled nearby. "That's wisdom. You don't throw away what you can fix." Zendaya smiled at both of them, not because everything was perfect, but because everything was honest. When she walked toward Eddie, her heart thumped, not with uncertainty, but with a quiet, steady assurance she hadn't felt in years. Eddie's eyes softened the moment he saw her. The sun framed her silhouette, turning the edges of her dress golden. She reached him, and he took her hands gently. The officiant stepped aside, saying, "I hear you two wrote your own vows." Eddie nodded first. He took a breath, eyes locked on hers. "Zendaya, years ago I promised to love, honor, and cherish you. I meant every word, but I failed to protect what we had. You deserved better, and you chose grace instead of giving up on me. I vow today to never take your heart for granted again, to show up fully, to listen deeply, to love intentionally. I choose you, now and always." Zendaya's eyes filled again, but not with pain, this time with warmth. Her turn. "Eddie, I won't pretend the journey back was easy. It wasn't. But the man standing in front of me, the man who learned, who grew, who fought alongside me, he is someone I can promise my heart to. I vow to communicate openly, to nurture our connection, and to trust the new foundation we built together. I choose you too." Guests wiped their eyes discreetly. Even Monica pretended she had allergies. The officiant smiled gently. "Then, with these vows renewed, you may seal this commitment." Eddie leaned in, gently, always gentle now, and kissed Zendaya with all the tenderness of a man who understood the weight of losing and the blessing of being given a second chance. When they pulled back, Zendaya whispered against his lips, "We made it." Eddie smiled, touching her cheek. "We're just getting started." Their vow renewal wasn't just a ceremony. It was a symbol of transformation, forgiveness, and a love rebuilt with intention. They walked away hand in hand, stronger, wiser, and ready to write the next chapter together. 6 months had passed since the vow renewal at Belle Isle, and in that time, Eddie and Zendaya's marriage had evolved into something deeper, steadier, and far more intentional than anything they had before. Not perfect. Perfection wasn't their goal anymore, but grounded, balanced, and nurtured through daily choices. Their mornings had a new rhythm. Zendaya would wake up first, heading downstairs for her herbal tea. Eddie followed shortly after, joining her at the dining table. Instead of scrolling on their phones or rushing through the start of the day, they spent the first 15 minutes talking, really talking, about how they felt, what they were grateful for, or what they hoped to accomplish. It became a ritual, one they both protected fiercely, a quiet anchor at the beginning of each day. Their evenings had changed too. Instead of retreating into separate corners of the house like they once did during their hardest years, they cooked dinner together almost every night. Eddie chopped vegetables. Zendaya seasoned the chicken. They moved around each other smoothly, sharing small smiles and leaning into each other's presence, Sometimes they listened to soft music. Sometimes they talked about their dreams or their nonprofit work. Sometimes they simply enjoyed the sound of pots clinking and water running. It wasn't about the task. It was about the togetherness. New habits formed naturally. Eddie left notes for Zendaya in her purse or on her desk. "Proud of you today." Zendaya texted him midday encouragement. "You handled that meeting well. I believe in you." Little gestures, steady warmth, evidence of a love that had not only survived but grown healthier. Their emotional connection took on a new strength as well. The counseling sessions didn't stop after the vow renewal. They continued once a month, not because they were struggling, but because they valued the clarity it brought. They learned how to communicate without fear, how to disagree without hostility, how to express needs without shutting down. For the first time in a long time, Zendaya felt safe. For the first time in a long time, Eddie felt worthy of her trust. The growth wasn't just visible to the two of them, it was visible to others. One evening in early summer, they were invited to speak at a local couples workshop hosted by a community center. Zendaya hesitated at first. She wasn't sure she wanted to share something so personal. But Eddie held her hand and said, "We don't have to hide what we overcame. Someone out there might need to hear it." The workshop took place in a modest hall with folding chairs arranged in rows. Couples of all ages attended, some newly married, some decades in, some struggling quietly. Eddie and Zendaya stood at the front of the room, holding hands as they spoke. Zendaya began, "We're not here to tell you we did everything right. We didn't, but we learned how to do things differently." Eddie continued, his voice steady. "We learned that love takes intentional action, and when trust breaks, rebuilding is possible, but only if both people show up and stay willing." They didn't share the deepest details, nothing about names or events that could re-traumatize. Instead, they spoke about communication, honesty, vulnerability, and the quiet power of forgiveness. They talked about showing up even when it hurt, about listening fully, and about choosing each other repeatedly. At one point, a woman in the audience asked, "How did you know your marriage was worth saving?" Zendaya looked at Eddie, then back at the group. "When I saw effort," she said softly, "real effort, not words, actions, that's when I knew." Eddie squeezed her hand, tears just barely forming. "And when she chose to fight with me, even after I hurt her, that told me our foundation mattered more than our mistakes." Applause filled the room, soft but heartfelt. After the workshop ended, several couples approached them privately, thanking them for their honesty. One older man shook Eddie's hand and said, "It takes strength to admit when you've been wrong, and even more strength to change." Eddie nodded respectfully. "I'm still learning, every day." Zendaya rested her hand on Eddie's back, pride glowing in her expression. She saw something in him now, a maturity, a steadiness, a clarity that hadn't always been there. Not the man he used to be, but the man he chose to become. Back at home that night, Zendaya and Eddie sat outside on their porch swing, watching the sky fade from soft pink to deep blue. Fireflies dotted the yard, flickering like warm specks of light. "That workshop," Zendaya said, leaning her head on Eddie's shoulder. "It felt good." "It did," Eddie agreed. "And I'm glad we did it together." She looked at him with admiration and tenderness. 6 months ago, I didn't know where we would end up." He brought her hand to his lips. 6 months ago, I was terrified I'd lose you forever." "But you didn't," she whispered. "No," he murmured, "because you gave us another chance, and I'll spend the rest of my life earning that." There was no tension in his voice, no hesitation, only gratitude and conviction. Zendaya smiled softly. "We're stronger now." "We are," Eddie agreed. "And I want us to keep growing, no matter what comes next." They fell into a peaceful silence, wrapped in the gentle summer air and the steady rhythm of the porch swing. Their past no longer defined them. Their future no longer frightened them. Their love, once shaken, now stood on steady ground. The shift began in the smallest ways, changes Zendaya noticed in her body but brushed aside at first. She felt more tired than usual, needed more sleep, and found herself craving strange combinations of food she normally wouldn't reach for. Eddie teased her lovingly one evening when she stared intensely at a jar of pickles. "You okay?" he asked, leaning on the counter. Zendaya blinked. "I'm just really drawn to these." He laughed lightly. "That's new." She shrugged it off, convinced it was stress or exhaustion from work. But when she felt queasy 2 mornings in a row and the fatigue refused to disappear, something inside her urged her to check, just to be sure. So on a quiet Thursday afternoon, after finishing work early, Zendaya stopped at a pharmacy. She walked through the aisles with a fluttering chest, picked up a test, and drove home with trembling hands. The house felt silent when she stepped inside. Eddie wouldn't be home for another hour, which gave her time to breathe and to panic. She went into the bathroom, closed the door, and took the test with shaking fingers. As she waited for the result, she sat on the edge of the tub, hands clasped tightly. Her thoughts swirled, not in fear, but in disbelief. Could this really be happening now, after everything they had been through? When the result appeared, she covered her mouth with both hands, her breath catching. Positive. The words stared back at her, bold and clear. Tears pooled in her eyes. Not the tears she shed months ago in heartbreak, but tears that trembled on the edge of joy and wonder. She was pregnant. When Eddie arrived home later, Zendaya was in the living room, trying to calm her racing heartbeat. She stood when she heard his keys in the lock. "Hey, Z," he called out. "Traffic was wild today." He stopped mid-sentence when he saw her standing there, hands clasped, eyes soft but shining. "Everything okay?" he asked, walking toward her. Zendaya took a slow breath. "Eddie, I have something to tell you." He felt his pulse quicken. "What is it?" She reached behind her, lifted the test she had placed carefully on the coffee table, and held it out to him. For a second, Eddie just stared at it, his mind processing the meaning. Then the realization hit him all at once. His eyes widened, then softened, filling with awe. "Zendaya, are you—" She nodded, her lips trembling into a smile. "Yes." He didn't move at first. Not out of hesitation, but because emotion rooted him to the spot. Then he stepped forward, cupped her face in his hands, and whispered, almost breathless, "We're having a baby?" She nodded again, tears slipping down her cheeks. "We are." Eddie pulled her into his arms, holding her as tightly and gently as he could. His voice cracked as he whispered into her hair, "Thank you. Thank you for this. Thank you for us." Zendaya melted into the embrace, her heart swelling as he kissed her forehead. The man who once nearly lost her now held her with a love strengthened by healing, honesty, and renewed commitment. The next few days were filled with excited whispers and tender moments. Eddie couldn't stop smiling. His joy radiated in every gesture. He checked in on Zendaya constantly, not overbearing but attentive in ways that made her feel cherished. "You comfortable? Need anything? Want me to cook tonight?" Zendaya laughed one evening and said, "Eddie, I'm pregnant, not fragile." "I know," he replied, grinning. "But I'm allowed to be excited." They began dreaming together, quietly at first, then more boldly. Late one night, they sat at the kitchen table with a notepad between them. "What about names?" Eddie asked. Zendaya smiled. "Already? We don't even know the gender. We can still start imagining," he said. "No pressure, no decisions, just dreaming." They didn't settle on anything, but the list of possibilities made them laugh, debate, and picture a future that once felt uncertain. They also started preparing practically. Eddie painted the spare room a warm, neutral shade, humming as he worked. Zendaya stood in the doorway, watching with her hand resting on her belly, imagining the tiny life growing inside her, sleeping in that very room. Eddie looked over his shoulder. "You like the color?" She nodded. "I love it. It feels peaceful." "Good," he said, returning to the wall. "Our baby deserves peaceful." Zendaya felt her heart tighten with affection. As the weeks progressed, they went to checkups together. Eddie held her hand tightly in the exam room, eyes glistening when they heard the heartbeat for the first time. The sound was quick and steady, filling the room in a way that made both of them go silent. Zendaya looked at Eddie. His lips parted, emotion flooding him. "That's our baby," he whispered. Zendaya squeezed his hand, her eyes glowing with warmth. "Yes, that's our little one." After the appointment, they walked out of the clinic hand in hand, lighter than air. Their excitement spread into every corner of their life. Eddie began organizing finances and fixing things around the house, preparing for the future. Zendaya read books on early parenthood and researched prenatal classes. They went to baby stores just to look, pointing out cribs and onesies, imagining their child in each one. One afternoon, while they walked through a small boutique, Eddie paused in front of a tiny pair of brown baby shoes. Zendaya smiled. "Thinking about them already?" "Always," Eddie answered quietly. "I want to be the father they look up to." She took his hand and pressed it to her belly. "You already are." Pregnancy brought changes, fatigue, cravings, fluctuating emotions, but Eddie was present for all of it. Zendaya appreciated every moment. Their marriage, once broken and restored, now blossomed into something even fuller, a partnership preparing to welcome new life. They were not just rebuilding a marriage anymore. They were building a family. As the months passed and Zendaya's pregnancy progressed, a quiet joy settled over their home. Their days carried a softness that came from patience, healing, and the anticipation of becoming parents. Eddie grew even more attentive, and Zendaya, glowing, hopeful, steady, embraced the coming changes with a peace she hadn't known in years. One warm evening in late summer, they decided to sit on the porch, something they hadn't done in a long time. Zendaya lowered herself gently onto the cushioned swing, while Eddie brought out 2 glasses of sparkling water and a small plate of fruit slices, just the way she liked them these days. The sun was beginning to set, casting warm hues across the yard. Fireflies blinked lazily near the bushes, and a soft breeze rustled the leaves of the tall maple tree near the driveway. It was the kind of evening that made the world feel steady and safe. Eddie sat beside her and placed his hand over the small curve of her belly. Their baby shifted lightly beneath his touch, and both of them smiled. "Still can't believe it sometimes," he said, voice full of wonder. Zendaya leaned her head on his shoulder. "I can. Everything we went through led us here." He exhaled slowly, studying her face as if memorizing every detail. "You know, sometimes I think about the night everything almost fell apart. The night I told you about Vanessa. And I still don't understand how you found the strength to give us another chance." Zendaya didn't respond immediately. She watched the fireflies flicker, thinking about the version of herself who stood in that kitchen months ago. Broken, terrified, unsure of whether she even recognized her own life. That woman felt distant now, but she hadn't forgotten her. Finally, she spoke softly. "Forgiveness isn't about pretending the pain didn't happen. It's about choosing what matters more than the pain. I chose you, Eddie, and I chose the life we fought to rebuild." Eddie lowered his head, emotion thick in his throat. "I'll never stop earning that." Zendaya turned toward him, lifting his chin gently. "You already are." They sat in silence for a while, the porch swing rocking gently beneath them. The peaceful quiet allowed their thoughts to settle, each breath grounding them further in the moment. After a while, Zendaya smiled. "You know what I learned through all of this?" "What's that?" "That love isn't just a feeling. It's a responsibility. A choice you make even when it's uncomfortable. A commitment to show up, especially on the days when you want to shut down." Eddie nodded slowly. "Yeah. And trust isn't something you ask for. It's something you prove." She touched his hand. "And you proved it." He turned his palm upward, intertwining his fingers with hers. "We proved it together." The sun continued to sink low, casting a gentle orange glow across the porch. Zendaya shifted slightly, placing her other hand on her belly as their baby nudged again. "You think we'll be good parents?" she asked quietly. Eddie smiled. "I think we'll be real parents, the kind who love, who listen, who apologize when they mess up, and who raise our child to understand grace." Zendaya let out a soft laugh. "Grace. That word means something different to me now. To me too," Eddie said. "It saved our marriage. And it's going to shape our family," Zendaya added. They both looked out at the yard, imagining their future, Birthdays, first steps, school mornings, late-night talks, laughter echoing through the house. A future that once felt so uncertain now felt bright and reachable. Eddie squeezed her hand gently. "Zendaya, can I ask you something?" "Of course. What's the biggest lesson you're taking from everything we went through?" She thought for a moment. That healing doesn't erase the past. It transforms it. Our marriage isn't perfect because we avoided pain. It's stronger because we faced it. We didn't run. We didn't bury it. We put in the work. Eddie nodded, absorbing her words. "And you?" she asked. "What's the lesson for you?" He exhaled thoughtfully, that a strong partner doesn't need you to be flawless. They just need you to be honest, present, willing to grow. I thought I had to hide my failures to protect you, but hiding them is what hurt us. Zendaya smiled softly, pride shining in her eyes. "You grew, Eddie. You've become the man I always saw in you." He rested his forehead against hers, closing his eyes. "Thank you for believing in that man even when I didn't." The sky darkened fully, stars beginning to appear one by one. Zendaya shifted closer, resting her hand on Eddie's chest. Her voice softened with meaning. "You know, if someone asked me whether I'd erase everything we went through, I would say no." Eddie pulled back slightly, surprised. "No?" She shook her head gently. "Because without the breaking, we wouldn't have rebuilt. Without the distance, we wouldn't have learned how to communicate. Without the hurt, we wouldn't have found this level of closeness." He kissed her forehead. "And without this journey, we wouldn't be sitting here preparing to become parents." Zendaya placed her hand over his again. Exactly. The moment felt full, quiet, sacred. Before they went inside for the night, Zendaya looked at Eddie, her voice steady and full of truth. "If there's one thing I want our child to learn from us, it's this. Love isn't about never falling. It's about how you rise together." Eddie closed his eyes briefly, letting the words sink into his heart. "And we rose," he whispered. "We did," Zendaya replied, smiling. They stood up from the swing, hands intertwined, ready to greet the future with a love rebuilt not from perfection, but from courage, honesty, and unwavering commitment. A new life awaited them, a new chapter, a new legacy built on strength, forgiveness, and devotion. Their story didn't end with betrayal. It continued with renewal. And that was the greatest lesson of all.